As a matter of fact, we don't have a program operating in Haiti, but in fact, one of our venturers out of Chicago, actually, his venture was disaster preparedness and creating disaster preparedness kits and disaster recovery kits, basically. And so he actually, it's also on our blog, blog.youthventure.org. One of the most recent postings we put up is that he's actually taken a role because he's been very involved, for example, with the Red Cross and so on. And so he is actually organizing young people in his organization and people connected to his network to send their aid and support the relief efforts through his organization really in support of the Red Cross, who are really the experts. So on the website, it talks about the work that he's doing and how people can engage through another young person if they want with him. So that's one example of a venture idea based on a passion in a way that it's addressing a real life problem. We certainly encourage the young people to kind of research and kind of do a needs assessment to assess what services or what exists already addressing the issue that they want to work with. One of the distinctions that happens, though, is that ultimately, I think in many cases, they largely create their own efforts for a specific reason. And by the way, they are not required to be sort of permanent. They don't necessarily have to incorporate or be, some do actually because they fill a niche. But they're not necessarily new organizations that are being created. Sometimes they're student clubs or student organizations that are just going to operate either at the school or in the local community or for just a couple of years and then sort of will pass on, will die down once the young people move on. One of the distinguishing features about the work of Youth Venture is that we put the young people in charge. And that, in fact, believe it or not, is a pretty kind of radical kind of concept in that we give them kind of really ultimate authority and we challenge them to come up with the idea, to drive the program. They require an adult ally, by the way, for anyone who's interested in supporting a venture team, someone over the age of 18 who is really just a resource, but who is not the organizer, who is not the de facto leader, who's not necessarily doing the work for them if they slack off. Really, we put it on them to sort of say, if you don't get the job done, it doesn't get done. It's as simple as that. And giving them that responsibility obviously is part of the transformative experience where they realize being in charge, they realize the consequences and or implications of their actions and so on. And so the reality, unfortunately, is that a lot of times the existing organizations with large infrastructure, it's hard for them to create enough space for the young person to have any true authority. And so ultimately the young person ends up having that. But again, we don't ask them to sort of create something necessarily in competition with what's existing or certainly that duplicates efforts. We sort of say to them, how can you add something that's new, that's different? And many times in the panel is actually where, if not beforehand, where that comes up, where it says, have you talked to existing organizations like X about partnering with them, about supplementing their work and so on? And so, as I just mentioned, for example, with this venture, this young man is doing disaster preparedness, but he's actually working in concert with the American Red Cross. So he's not basically doing the same work as the Red Cross just for the sake of it by himself, but rather in a way that adds and contributes and ultimately, I think, is bringing new young people into the network that the Red Cross wasn't already reaching. And so it ends up being complementary at the end of the day, and really everyone sort of learns something new because the adult groups really sort of discover the potential of the young people, right? Which is also part of, by the way, of our sneaky mission, which is to help society realize that young people have so much more to offer than we think, that they're not all sort of apathetic, that they can make responsible decisions and they can contribute while they're still young people. They don't have to wait till they reach 30 in order to be given any kind of real authority, so long as they're given the right kind of support and guidance along the way. And so that's something that often opens people's eyes. First of all, ultimately our goal is everyone. And literally, I mean, we were not kidding. I mean, we have our strategic plan talks about us directly impacting 1 billion young people around the world and the other 5.5 billion inhabitants of the world ultimately becoming part of the same awareness. In the short term, though, what we do is we sort of, have sort of an open door policy where we're available and we have a website up. And so anyone who's interested, who comes to us, who hears about us, we encourage. And then secondly, we sort of do strategic outreach through schools, through after-school programs, partner organizations, Boys and Girls Clubs, the YMCA, et cetera. Anywhere we can find young people who are organized, we try to recruit. We have a bit of an eye, but not an overwhelming eye towards working with at-risk young people. One of the things we found is that the transformation is just that much deeper because often they realizing the power within them is just something that hits them so much more profoundly when there's other challenges, not to mention they being closer, as you know, the example Stephanie gave, them often being closer to real life challenges often come up with some of the newest, most creative ideas and have the most passion around it, right? Because it touches them personally. And so they often are the most driven with their solution. But like I said, we actually, in fact, are quite proud of the fact that our venturer network really sort of has young people of all backgrounds, in 43 states around the United States, as well as DC, on the island of Puerto Rico, et cetera, et cetera. So of all types of backgrounds and walks of life, we do have young people, although we do find that again, some of the more interesting impact comes out of young people in at-risk communities. And so Washington, D.C. obviously is a really excellent community for us to be doing our work.